Good morning. Let's get into it. So today we are going to talk about event sourcing. Now, what is event sourcing? Well, the fact of the matter is that I was introduced to the concept at my first job actually, and it's only now I don't know how many years later that I've actually gotten the opportunity to work with it in production. And if you are an expert at event sourcing, please, take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt. I don't know every single thing about it, but I think that the concept is interesting enough that I wanted to make a small video about it and talk a little bit of my experiences working with it. So let's define things a little bit first. So the idea behind event sourcing, it's basically a way of making an application structure. It's a way of, think of it as a practice of writing code. It's the closest thing I can give you to give you a really concrete example of how it's used. It's actually Flux. If you worked with React, for example, Flux is event sourcing at its core. The idea is basically that you have your models, you have data structures such as a user or a product or a ticket or something like that. Basically a model. And hopefully you are familiar with models. If you're not, you go and have a look at, how application structures are today. If you're new to programming, this may not be the video for you, but hopefully it's going to make sense to those of you who know a few things at least. So you have your model traditionally, and what you traditionally do is you have some type of endpoints. Like, let's say you make a web server, you have something like you want to add a product to a user's basket. So what usually happens then is that, all right, you have an endpoint to make the purchase or to add a product to the basket, and you go to the database, you fetch the model with the data that is, the user's data, and you add and then you go, of course, to the database to get the product ID and all the information about the product, and then you basically take a product from the database. You take a product from the database and you add that ID, or you create a connection, a relationship between the user's basket and the product. And then that's it. Now, what is wrong with that? Well, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It actually has that's usually how it works. But in event sourcing, it's a bit different. So in event sourcing, you have the concept of a view. Now, I think that this is a semantic meaning, but to me, a view is very much like a model. It's basically, you have a user view you have a product view. And so, in what you would do, instead of making a direct access to the user, pulling up the user and then pulling up the product, and then adding the ID to the user's basket, is that you would create a action. You would create a event called something called along the lines of add product to user basket, for example. And then you would attach the necessary information in order to make this mutation on the product, on the user view, basically. So the flow would go, all right, you pull up the user from the data, you read up the user from the database, you read up the product from the database, you instantiate a event called add product to user basket or something like that. You add the user, you add the user and you add the product's ID to the event, and then you dispatch it to an event handler. And in that event handler, two things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is that you're saving the event. So you store that action, that event itself that holds the information about the user and holds the information about the product. You're saving that to the database. You save in event sourcing, you save every event. And I'll tell you in a moment why you do that. And then it takes care of the mutation. So it does the update on the user, adds the product to the user, and saves that to the database. So as you can see, there's really only one step more than you would normally do. Now, what does this bring? Why is this such a great idea? The reason why I think this is a great idea is because all of a sudden, now you have a record for what happened in the system. Let's say that you lose all your data. Let's say that something happens with that user, and for some reason you need to recreate that user in the state that it has at a given point in time. Let's say that you needed to recreate your entire database or something of that nature, and you really only have these events. Because you only have the events, you can, or rather, if you have the events, you have a record of every single write or update to the database that has existed historically. You get traceability, which is so powerful. You can recreate any data structure that you have in your database. You can create any user, recreate any user. You can recreate any product and so forth. As long as you keep on, if you keep this like this thought in your head that every mutation, every write to the database is treated as an event, a first-class citizen that you save to the database. This is extremely helpful when you want to, say, hydrate a cache of some sort, or you simply want to achieve a traceability, that's actually what I think is the most powerful part about this. It's the thing that makes me excited about event sourcing, because it allows me to very easily see how a series of events led up to a certain state. That traceability I was hyping just a few seconds ago, that's the thing that makes me the most excited. So when I started using this, I realized that this has how do I put it? It has a great deal of potential when it comes to more like this. In my specific use case at my company, we use it for bank transactions, and it's a really good, strong use case, because it creates a system that, how do I put this in a nice way? It creates a system that is not only much more robust, if you ask me, because like having that traceability is very important, but it also allows basically it allows you to see, how do I put it? It's like logging. It's like logging plus. It's like tracing all the steps that you take within the system, so that you can actually read the history of everything that's going on. Now, I'll give you one of my favorite examples, at least at my job, where I really saw the value, and that was that, like, we have administrators that work on the product, and basically whenever they do anything in their administration tool, that, because admins have a lot of power, they have kind of destructive power as well. They have privileges that would allow them sometimes to do things that could be a little, they could send out an email, or they could change something in the database and so forth. And the thing is that when you use event sourcing like this, they are secured by the fact that since we're never since the events are there, let's say that our admins made a big critical mistake. Let's say that they did something that damaged our database. And remember, we have to remember that data is everything in an IT business. Like, your data that's your whole business. Let's say they did something like that. They broke data, something, or they lost the production database or something like that. If you have event sourcing, you can recreate that data. Any mistake can be undone. It's basically like when you're in your IDE, and you can tap backwards in time and undo the stuff that you did and go back to a point where it's basically in a state where you want it to be, or you want to go forward again. And that's really powerful. That's why I'm so excited about event sourcing. It's such a powerful way of making sure, or like securing your data long term. So hopefully I made you a little bit curious about event sourcing. Please have a look at it. I think I'm actually very excited to start a new project, whatever, and actually try to use event sourcing, maybe as my default, actually.